In this Rick Talk, we will talk about a very important aspect of print, and I'm separating that at the moment from multimedia and web pages. We're talking about printing documents. All right, and so the thing about this is that it is a fundamentally important issue. It relates very strongly to the Photoshop number 4 in the series that I have on the Rick Rice 1 channel. So you should watch that as a companion to this Rick Talk. Now, the thing about this is that I'm amazed over the years how many professionals don't understand the concepts and the formula that we're going to talk about today. And it's fundamental to print, always has been. First off, let's try to clarify a couple of things. We have resolution. We talk about resolution in a lot of different ways, and there are different aspects of resolution. So to try to clarify, let's talk about what I consider the three main areas or aspects of resolution. First off, we have output, and very plainly said, anytime we print a document, printing images and type on any kind of piece of paper, or in the case of professional output, often on film, and increasingly now directly to the metal plates that go onto the printing press. Okay, and when we talk about outputting things, we talk about dots per inch, DPI, dots per inch, and that reason is because whether it's letters that we type to perform spelling of words, or images, those are made either if it comes out of a laser printer. It's little patterns of very small dots clustered together in the shape of the letters. Lets us see words on paper. And as we're going to talk about, in particular, when we print images, photographic type images, that really, if we could get close enough and see very easily and clearly, we would see that in fact there are clusters of itty bitty little dots. Okay, and so it's dots per inch. When we talk about inputting, or simply think of it in a more general manner of creating things in Photoshop, or scanning, or taking a picture with our digital camera, think of that as creating and producing images, and so that's inputting information. And it's very important that we use the proper terminology, which a lot of people don't. They don't. And so when we're talking about the resolution of, for instance, a Photoshop image, many professionals, many professional documents will refer to that as dots per inch, but it's simply not true. And if you again look at the videos, and you've sat and listened to some professionals, the images in Photoshop are made out of little square pixels. They've got nothing to do with the dots that print those images on paper. So, inputting, it's very important. Pixels per inch, PPI, not DPI. Okay? Then there's a third aspect of resolution, and this is a major part of what we're focusing on in this Rick Talk, and that is called these days LPI, lines per inch. And what that refers to is something that has been used in printing, conventional printing, long before the computers. Long before the computers, and it simply was done manually on a big camera by somebody in the darkroom. And now it's taken care of when we print our documents on our electronic devices. LPI has to do with the density of halftone cells. And old-timers, if you will, know it. They may not know the new term LPI, but you ask somebody that's worked at a print shop for many years, what's your halftone screen? Oh, yeah, sure, I know what my halftone screen is. So that's the old term. It's also sometimes referred to as screen frequency and line frequency. But it's all about halftone cells that give us the illusion of tonality. LPI is the halftone screen, lines per inch. Okay. Now, there is no relationship of any significance between the dots per inch that print our images on pieces of paper and film and the resolution of our Photoshop images, PPI. But there is a very, very important relationship between the third aspect that I just mentioned, LPI, and the resolution of your Photoshop images, the PPI. There is a very important relationship between those two, and that's what we're really going to be focusing on here. Okay, so let's talk about some basic concepts so that we can have hopefully the big picture idea of what this is about and why it's important. Remember, and I've talked about this again in some of my Photoshop videos, continuous tone. Continuous tone is the way our eyes see the world. We see things, it's how we see things with depth and dimension. We see the world around us, whether it's in color, of course, or even if we're looking at it on a black and white TV. We see dark shades and light shades and images that appear to give us a sense of dimension and depth of field. Any traditional photograph meaning not printed digitally on our inkjet printer, but a good old-fashioned photograph. And again, let's keep it simple and just talk about black and white, even though this concept relates as well to color images. But traditional photographs, any kind of a drawing or painting that you and I or somebody might do, we see dark and light tones, again, gently flowing together to give us this sense of depth and dimension. And the way we produce continuous tone on a printing press is really, once again, like so many of the things that I talk about, even in the computer, it's all smoke and mirrors. Because the reality is that we create the illusion of tone or continuous tone. And it's the LPI, or the halftone screen, that lets us see the illusion of tone. And again, the idea is that the elements that make up these things are so small that in general our naked eye can't see them very easily. But if we look under a magnifying glass, just look at some pictures in a newspaper or a magazine or any brochure or book, and you will see, if you look closely, that there's really a bunch of dots and halftone cells that give us the illusion of continuous tone. And so what we end up with is halftone cells that in different sizes and groups of dots make up these larger dots, if you will, that are halftone cells. And we only have halftone cells if we have a photographic type image that needs to be reproduced. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. It's just not a factor in our thinking. But to reproduce images faithfully on a printing press before the digital world and now with the digital world is basically the same in many of its fundamental respects. So the way halftone cells work, as you can see by looking at these images, the same image enlarged and then reduced. Halftone cells, large ones close together, create the dark areas of a photograph, and smaller ones that are spread apart let the white of the paper, if you will, shine through, and our eyes mix it all together, and it gives us the illusion of a light area. And so it is smoke and mirrors, and it's the illusion that fools the eye into thinking that we see continuous tone. Maybe eventually we'll be able to, technology will improve to the point where we can truly reproduce continuous tone, but on printed surfaces to this date, there is no such thing as true continuous tone. And if you again look at those videos that I've done, you will see I point out very clearly, I think 4, 5, 6 of the Photoshop series. You zoom in and you can see very clearly that a photograph is not really a photograph. It's made up of a bunch of little square pixels. And because they're so small, they appear to have different shades, which is an illusion. And they're so small, and again, our eye mixes them all together, and we look at things on our computer screens, and they appear to be like reality, continuous tone. But it's not true. It's all smoke and mirrors. So here you can see, I purposely zoomed in, and you can see this what's going on here with this photograph. Okay, and again, typically the halftone cells are so small you can't see them. You can almost see them with the naked eye in newspaper printing because they use a very low or coarse halftone screen setup, and you can actually almost see the halftone cells with the naked eye. That's what sort of that graininess is in newspapers. Okay? So, why are we taking so much time and energy to talk about this? What is needed is the correct amount of pixels in our images, electronic information. The correct amount of PPI is needed if we want to have reliable results and have our images print and look great. Okay, sometimes you luck out and they look great, but it's been known to happen many times for lots of us, and that is it looked great in your camera, it looked great on the computer screen, and then you print it, and because of some issues related to the resolution, you print it and it looks terrible. And that's what we're talking about here. You can get reliable results, predictable results, if you follow this simple little formula and understand this concept that, again, you'd be surprised how many professional people don't know about this and don't understand it. Okay? So, what we need is we need to know what our halftone screen, or LPI, is, and it varies depending on the printing situation. The LPI of a laser printer at your office or at home is different than printing on a newspaper, for a newspaper, or printing for a real slick high-end brochure or annual report with beautiful photographs that have a very high LPI to make it look more like true continuous tone. So you have to find out what the correct LPI is, and then you need to run the little formula, and you'll come out with knowing what the resolution of your Photoshop image needs to be to get predictable, reliable results. And the formula is, in its simplest form, right here, 1.5 to 2 times the LPI. And you can find out what the LPI is. I'm going to give you some basics, and you can always ask your printing company what LPI they use. Now, the folks at you know, the little quick print shop might be a little bit flaky on this, or the little copy shop. You know, we all know those different companies, and they do a great job, but they may not necessarily know. But I'm going to give you some basics that you can live by, and you should be all right, even on your own. Okay? 1.5 to 2 times the LPI is going to tell us what the proper resolution or pixels per inch in Photoshop ought to be. And as you can see, it's a slight range. You've got 1.5, 1.5 times the LPI is the low end. And it's very important that you don't end up with resolution below 1.5 of the LPI. And it doesn't make it any better if you have more resolution, more pixels per inch than 2 times the LPI. It simply is a matter of like diminishing returns. It just, you know, doesn't make it better. Okay? So, now, here is some basic information and some examples of the formula. You can pretty much take it to the bank that most laser printers, now we're not talking about the small, the smaller, cheaper inkjet printers that a lot of us have at home. We're talking about a laser printer that might be at the office and some of you might have at home. A laser printer is going to generally have these days a minimum of an 85 LPI. In our town, the newspaper uses an 85 line screen, an 85 LPI again. And commercial printing, think of that as, again, glossy, classy looking brochures and things of that nature. They use a much higher LPI. And remember, whatever aspect of resolution we're talking about, the higher the resolution, the smaller the individual elements are going to be. If it's in Photoshop, higher pixels per inch means that the grid of pixels are smaller and there are more of them. And the same goes for the dots per inch in printing, and especially in the LPI or halftone screen. The higher the LPI, then the finer and nicer looking things are going to be. And again, it gives us closer, gets us closer, if you will, to the illusion of true continuous tone. So commercial printing uses these days 150 LPI, and as the technology is improving, it's getting higher and higher as time goes on. So typically you would ask your printer what LPI are they using. If you read the specs, if you're putting together ads for the newspaper in your town, well, it's right there. Again, you just need to know what you're looking at and know the information that you need to find out, what file formats, what software programs they accept. And one of the things that they're certainly going to tell you in there, if you need to be able to recognize it and see it and have it jump out at you, is what is their halftone screen, or LPI. Okay, so here are a couple of examples. Very simply put, remember 1.5 to 2 times the LPI. And so here I've got on the low end 1.5. Let's just say we're printing to a laser printer in the office, or in fact creating an ad for the newspaper. So the low end, 1.5 times 85 is 127. Essentially, we're rounding it off, pixels per inch. On the high end, it's 2 times the LPI, so it'd be 2 times 85 is 170. And so the resolution of the images that I have and want to see printed and look good need to be between 127 and 170 pixels per inch. If they're a little bit higher, great, but it won't make it better. But absolutely, it can't be below 127 pixels per inch. You may not get a good looking image. All right, and then again, the same thing, but apply the commercial printing much higher LPI of 150. So 1.5 times 150 is a minimum 225 pixels per inch that your image needs to be. And on the high end, 2 times 150 gives us 300. Okay, so images for a slick brochure or annual report or magazine ought to be between 225 and 300 pixels per inch when we in fact look at them in Photoshop, if we want to get predictable results. Okay, and the important concept here is that if I were, let's just pretend, if I were the printing device, I would be saying, okay, you want me to make up the halftone cells and reproduce your images beautifully. Well, you've got to give me enough electronic information. The resolution needs to be especially high enough for me to be able to convert that, rip that information, rasterize it into dots, and the dots into halftone cells if we want reliable, predictable results. And let's just say again, I'm sort of pretending if I'm the printing device and your resolution of your images is too low, I might be wanting to say to you, hey, look, I gotta, I'm a printing device and I gotta put some halftone cells in there, and you haven't given me enough electronic information for me to crunch and do my job, so I'm just gonna have to guess at it a little bit. And in plain English, what might very well happen is that your images in reproduction are a little bit flat. They just don't have the punch that the originals had. And if the resolution is much too low, then you're going to be in a real pickle, because as we've all seen from time to time, the images might in fact be bitmapped and really jagged and look almost like the pixels out of Photoshop. And so you can end up with some real messes on your hands. And you won't see it on the screen because on the screen our monitors are for the most part basically low resolution devices. And so you won't see a low resolution problem on the screen. you won't see it until it comes off of a printing press, and then you have 10,000 brochures or whatever it is, or the ad is in the newspaper and it's too late to pull it back. And so that's what we're talking about. Again, I'm always trying to bring it back to real world stuff. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and there is a companion second part to this Rick Talk, and you really need to watch the two of them, but I didn't want to go on for too long at one gulp. So thanks for tuning in, and be sure and watch the next one, Rick Talk, because it is a companion to this Rick Talk. Thanks very much.